My mother-in-law twisted my son's arm and called him a mistake after he spilled a drink at the dinner table. When I stood up to defend him, my husband said she's just old school. Let it go. My father-in-law even spat on my son's face as he was crying, saying, "You are exactly like your worthless mother." I just grabbed my son and left the house immediately. The next morning, without anyone knowing, I left the state, and what I did next left all of them speechless. My name's Megan, I'm 32, and up until 6 months ago, I thought I had a pretty normal life. I'd been married to my husband Ryan for 8 years, and we had one son together, Owen, who just turned 7. Ryan's parents, Carol and Gary, lived about 20 minutes away, and we'd do the whole family dinner thing every couple of weeks. Now, Carol had always been, let's call it, particular. She was one of those women who had very strong opinions about how things should be done, and she wasn't shy about sharing them. She'd make little comments about my cooking, my housekeeping, how I dressed Owen. Nothing too horrible, just enough to make me feel like I was constantly being graded on a report card I never signed up for. Gary was quieter but had this way of looking at you like you were something he'd scraped off his shoe. He'd worked construction his whole life and had that old school mentality where showing any kind of emotion made you weak. Ryan always said his dad was just from a different generation, which was code for "please don't make me deal with this." And Ryan. Oh, Ryan. I loved that man for 8 years, but looking back, I can see all the red flags I ignored. He was a peacekeeper, which sounds nice until you realize that sometimes keeping the peace means throwing the people you're supposed to protect under the bus. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the dinner that changed everything. It was a Sunday in early March. We'd driven over to Carol and Gary's house for our usual family dinner. Owen had been excited all week because Carol always made these amazing chocolate chip cookies, and honestly, they were pretty darn good. He'd been talking about them non-stop. We got there around 4 p.m., and everything seemed normal at first. Carol had made pot roast, which was actually one of her better dishes, and Gary was in his usual spot in front of the TV, half watching some sports thing. Ryan immediately disappeared into the living room to join his dad, leaving me to help Carol in the kitchen. "Owen looks thin," Carol said the moment Ryan was out of earshot. "Are you feeding him enough?" I bit my tongue and smiled. "He's growing just fine, Carol. The pediatrician says he's right on track." "Doctors these days don't know anything," she muttered, then handed me a stack of plates. "Set the table. And make sure Owen doesn't touch anything expensive." The expensive comment was rich, considering their dining room set looked like it came from a garage sale in 1987, but whatever. I set the table and called everyone in for dinner. Here's where things started going sideways. Owen was excited and chatty, telling his grandparents about school and his friends. He was gesturing with his hands while he talked, you know how kids do, and he knocked over his glass of apple juice. It wasn't a big deal. The glass was plastic, Carol wasn't stupid, and it was maybe half full. The juice spilled onto the table and started dripping onto the floor. Owen's face immediately went red, and he started apologizing. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." That's when Carol lost it. She grabbed Owen's arm, his left arm, right above the elbow, and twisted it hard enough that I heard him gasp. "You stupid little mistake," she hissed. "Can't you do anything right? Just like your mother, making messes everywhere you go." I was on my feet before I even realized I'd moved. "Carol, let go of him right now." She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Excuse me? Let go of my son." Owen was crying now, trying to pull his arm away, and I could see her fingers digging into his skin. I reached over and grabbed her wrist. I said, "Let go." She finally released him, and Owen immediately ran to me, clutching his arm. I could see red marks where her fingers had been. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I said, pulling Owen behind me. "Don't you dare use that tone with me in my own house," Carol snapped. "That child needs discipline. He's running wild because you're too soft on him." Ryan finally looked up from his plate. "Mom, maybe nothing," I interrupted. "She hurt him, Ryan. Look at his arm." Ryan glanced at Owen, who was still crying and holding his arm, then looked back at his mother. "Mom, you probably shouldn't have." "Shouldn't have what?" Gary's voice cut through the room like a knife. He'd been quiet up until now, but apparently, he decided to join the party. "Shouldn't have taught the boy some manners?" "There's a difference between teaching manners and hurting a child," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Gary stood up slowly, and I could smell the beer on his breath. He'd been drinking before dinner, nothing new there. That boy is soft because you're raising him like a girl. A little discipline never hurt anyone. Discipline? I was trying so hard not to lose it completely. She called him a mistake and twisted his arm hard enough to leave bruises. Well, maybe if you'd raised him right, he wouldn't be so clumsy, Gary said, taking a step toward us. That's when Owen, still crying, looked up at his grandfather and said, "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I didn't mean to spill it." And Gary, this 68-year-old man, looked down at my 7-year-old son and spit directly in his face. "You're exactly like your worthless mother," he said. "Nothing but trouble." I've never experienced rage like that before in my life. It was like someone had injected lava directly into my bloodstream. I grabbed Owen, who was now sobbing and wiping spit off his cheek, and started backing toward the door. "Ryan," I said, my voice shaking. "We're leaving. Now." Ryan looked between me and his parents, and I could see him calculating. This was his moment to choose his family or his wife and son. "Megan, come on," he said. "They're just old school. Dad didn't mean it like that. Let's just calm down and let it go?" I finished for him. "Your father just spit on our son's face and called him worthless, and you want me to let it go?" "He's been drinking," Ryan said, like that was supposed to make it better. "You know how he gets." I stared at my husband, this man I'd been married to for 8 years, who was telling me to let it go while our son stood there with his grandfather's spit still on his face. "No," I said. "We're done here." I grabbed my purse and Owen's jacket and headed for the door. Ryan called after me, but I didn't stop. Kara was yelling something about how I was being dramatic and how I'd better not keep Owen away from them. I got Owen buckled into his car seat, and he was still crying, still wiping his face. I handed him some tissues and tried to keep my own tears from falling. "Mommy, why did Grandpa spit on me?" he asked. I didn't have an answer for that. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes adults are just cruel for no good reason? "I don't know, baby," I said. "But it's not okay, and it's never going to happen again." Ryan came running out as I was starting the car. He tapped on my window, and against my better judgment, I rolled it down. "Megan, please. Let's just talk about this." "Talk about what, Ryan?" "About how your parents abused our son and you did nothing? About how your father spit in a child's face and you made excuses for him?" "They're family," he said, like that explained everything. "So are we," I said. "Or at least, we're supposed to be." I drove home in silence, except for Owen's occasional sniffles from the back seat. When we got home, I took pictures of the bruises on his arm. I didn't know why at the time, it just seemed like something I should document. That night, after I'd gotten Owen calmed down and put to bed, I sat on my couch and really looked at my life. I mean, really looked at it. How many times had Carol made cruel comments about me in front of Owen? How many times had Gary been drunk and belligerent during family gatherings? How many times had Ryan chosen the path of least resistance instead of standing up for us? I'd been making excuses for them for years. That's just how they are. They're from a different generation. Family is family. But you know what? Family doesn't spit on children. Family doesn't call 7-year-olds mistakes. And family sure as heck doesn't tell you to let it go when someone hurts your child. I stayed up all night thinking, and by morning, I'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. I was going to leave. Not just the house, I was going to leave the state. Now, before you think I'm some kind of impulsive person who makes major life decisions overnight, let me explain. I'm an accountant, and I've always been careful with money. I had a savings account that Ryan didn't know about, not because I was hiding it, but because I'd opened it with my maiden name before we got married and just never closed it. I'd been putting a little money in there every month, thinking it was for emergencies. Well, this felt like an emergency. I also had a sister, Hannah, who lived in Portland, Oregon. We'd been close growing up, but life had gotten in the way, and we mostly just texted on birthdays and holidays. But I knew she'd help me if I asked. She'd been through her own messy divorce a few years back, and she'd always told me I could count on her if I ever needed anything. So Monday morning, after Ryan left for work and Owen was at school, I called Hannah. "Megan? What's wrong?" she said the moment she heard my voice. "You sound terrible." I told her everything. The dinner, the spitting, Ryan's reaction, all of it. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long pause. "Pack your stuff," she said finally. "Both of you. Come to Portland. You can stay with me as long as you need to." "Hannah, I can't just..." "Yes, you can. I have a spare bedroom, and Owen can start school here if he needs to. My company is always looking for good accountants, and I know people. You don't have to figure everything out right now, but you need to get out of there. I was crying by then. What about Ryan? What about him? He made his choice yesterday when he told you to let it go. Now you're making yours. She was right. I'd been so focused on trying to make my marriage work, on keeping everyone happy, that I'd forgotten I had choices too. I spent the rest of Monday making plans. I called Owen's school and told them he'd be out for a family emergency. I called my job and used some of the vacation time I'd been saving up. I researched apartments in Portland and found a few that looked promising. But here's where it gets interesting. See, I wasn't just running away. I was angry, and I wanted Carol and Gary to understand that actions have consequences. Carol worked part-time at a local real estate office, one of those small, family-owned places where everyone knows everyone. She wasn't licensed or anything, she just answered phones and filed paperwork. But she was proud of that job, always talking about how important she was to the office. Gary had been retired for 5 years, but he still did odd jobs for people in the neighborhood. Word-of-mouth stuff, mostly. He was actually pretty good at it, and it gave him some extra spending money. I spent Monday evening doing some research, and what I found was very interesting. See, Carol's real estate office had a pretty active social media presence. They posted about their listings, their agents, community events, all that stuff. And Carol was always bragging about being their office manager, she wasn't, and how she'd been there for 15 years, she'd been there for 6. Gary's odd jobs were mostly cash under the table, which was fine for small stuff. But I'd overheard him talking to Ryan about some bigger projects he'd been doing lately. Apparently, he'd been doing some work for a local property management company, installing new fixtures, minor repairs, that kind of thing. The kind of work that probably should have been reported as income. Now, I'm not saying I was planning to do anything illegal or unethical. But I'm an accountant, and I understand paperwork, and I know how to find information that's publicly available. Tuesday morning, I started packing. I was systematic about it. I made lists, took pictures of everything, kept receipts. I wasn't taking anything that wasn't clearly mine or Owen's, but I was taking everything that was ours. While I was packing, Ryan called. "Hey," he said, and I could hear the guilt in his voice. "How's Owen doing?" "He's fine," I said. "No thanks to your parents." "Megan, I know you're upset, but..." "I'm not upset, Ryan. I'm done." There was a pause. "What do you mean, done?" "I mean I'm done pretending that what happened Sunday was okay. I'm done making excuses for people who hurt our son. I'm done being married to someone who won't protect his own family." "That's not fair," Ryan said. "You know I love you and Owen." "Do I?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you love keeping the peace more than you love us. Can we please just talk about this when I get home?" "Sure," I said. "We can talk." But I knew there wasn't really anything left to say. Ryan came home early that afternoon, probably hoping to catch me in a better mood. He found me in the bedroom, folding Owen's clothes into a suitcase. "What are you doing?" he asked, though I think he already knew. "Packing," I said without looking up. "Megan, come on. You can't be serious." I stopped folding and looked at him. Really looked at him. "Your father spit on our son's face, Ryan. He called him worthless. Your mother twisted his arm hard enough to leave bruises and called him a mistake. And when I asked you to defend him, you told me to let it go. I know it sounds bad when you put it like that. It sounds bad because it is bad. There's no other way to put it." Ryan sat down on the bed, running his hands through his hair. "Where are you going to go?" "That's not really your concern anymore." "Of course it's my concern. You're my wife. Owen's my son." "Then act like it," I said. "Stand up to your parents. Tell them what they did was wrong and that it will never happen again. Cut them off until they apologize and get some help." Ryan was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I can't do that, Megan. They're my parents. And Owen's your son. But apparently, that doesn't matter as much." I finished packing Owen's clothes and moved on to my own stuff. Ryan sat there watching me, occasionally making half-hearted attempts to talk me out of leaving, but his heart wasn't really in it. I think he knew it was over. Owen came home from school around 3:30, and I could see the confusion on his face when he saw the suitcases. "Are we going on a trip, Mommy?" he asked. "Something like that, sweetie. We're going to go visit Aunt Hannah in Portland for a while." "What about Daddy?" I glanced at Ryan, who was standing in the doorway looking lost. "Daddy's going to stay here. But we'll talk to him on the phone, okay?" Owen nodded, but I could see he didn't really understand. How could he? I barely understood it myself. We left Wednesday morning. I'd loaded everything into my Honda Civic. It was amazing how little we actually needed when you got down to the essentials. Ryan stood in the driveway watching us drive away, and I felt empty. Not sad, exactly, but like I was leaving behind a life that had never really fit me anyway. The drive to Portland took about 12 hours with stops, and Owen was a trooper. We played card games, listened to music, and stopped at a McDonald's with a play area so he could burn off some energy. Every time he asked when we were going home, I told him we were going to stay with Aunt Hannah for a while and see how we liked it. Hannah was waiting for us when we pulled into her driveway Wednesday evening. She'd taken the day off work, stocked her fridge with kid-friendly food, and set up the spare bedroom with bunk beds she'd borrowed from a friend. "Uncle Hannah," Owen shouted, running into her arms. He'd been calling her Uncle Hannah since he was 3, when he couldn't understand why some people were aunts and some were uncles. She'd never corrected him. "Hey there, buddy," she said, picking him up and spinning him around. "Ready for an adventure?" That first week was hard. Owen kept asking when we were going home, and I kept having to explain that this was home now, at least for a while. Ryan called every day, begging me to come back, promising things would be different. But he never once said his parents were wrong. He never once said he'd cut them off. It was always, "We'll work it out and they'll come around." But I was done waiting for people to come around. By the second week, I'd found a job. Hannah's company really was looking for an accountant, and my experience was exactly what they needed. I'd start the following Monday. I'd also found a lawyer. Her name was Jessica Morales, and she specialized in family law. She was tough, smart, and had zero patience for nonsense. "Tell me about the incident," she said during our consultation. I told her everything, showed her the pictures of Owen's bruises, explained about Ryan's refusal to stand up to his parents. "Do you want full custody?" she asked. I thought about it. I want to protect my son. If that means full custody, then yes. Given the documented abuse and your husband's failure to protect the child, I think we have a strong case. But you should know that this is going to get ugly. In-laws don't usually take kindly to being cut off from their grandchildren. She was right about that. The paperwork was filed on a Friday, 3 weeks after we'd left. Ryan was served with divorce papers at work, which I felt a little bad about, but not bad enough to change my mind. He called me that evening, furious. "You filed for divorce? Without even trying to work things out?" "I tried to work things out for 8 years, Ryan. I'm tired of being the only one trying." "And you're asking for full custody? That's completely unreasonable." "What's unreasonable is expecting me to share custody with someone who won't protect our son from abuse. My parents aren't abusive. They're just old school." "Yeah, you keep saying that. But old school doesn't excuse spitting on children." The conversation went downhill from there. Ryan accused me of being vindictive, of using Owen as a weapon, of overreacting to everything. I listened to him rant for about 10 minutes before I hung up. But Ryan's reaction was nothing compared to what happened when Carol and Gary found out. They showed up at Hannah's house on a Tuesday evening, about a week after Ryan had been served. I have no idea how they got the address, probably from Ryan, though he denied it later. Hannah answered the door, took one look at them, and immediately called for me. "Megan." Carol's voice was shrill even from the front porch. "You get out here right now. You have no right to keep Owen away from us." I came to the door with Owen behind me. He'd been playing with some Legos in the living room, but as soon as he heard Carol's voice, he'd run to me and grabbed onto my leg. "You need to leave," I said through the screen door. "This is private property, and you're not welcome here." "That's our grandson," Gary bellowed. "You can't just take him away." "I can, and I did. You lost the right to see him when you abused him." "We didn't abuse anyone," Carol shrieked. "We were trying to teach him some manners." "By spitting on him?" Gary's face was red, and I could see a vein pulsing in his forehead. "You little witch, you don't know what you're messing with. We'll see about this." "Yes, you will," I said. "In court." They left, but not before Gary kicked Hannah's mailbox hard enough to dent it. The next morning, Hannah found sugar in her gas tank. That afternoon, someone called Child Protective Services and reported that I was neglecting Owen and keeping him in unsafe conditions. The CPS worker who came to investigate was actually really nice. Her name was Susan, and she could see immediately that Owen was healthy, happy, and well cared for. She still had to do the full investigation, it's protocol, but she was clearly annoyed that someone had wasted her time with a false report. This happens more often than you'd think, she told me. Usually it's an angry ex or in-laws who are trying to cause trouble. Do you have any idea who might have called? I had a pretty good idea, but I didn't want to make accusations without proof. What I did have was Jessica, who was absolutely livid when I told her what had happened. They're escalating, she said. First they show up at your house, then they vandalize property, then they file false reports with CPS. This is harassment, and we're going to document every single incident. She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Carol and Gary tried everything they could think of to make my life miserable. They called my new job and claimed I was a child abuser. They filed complaints with the police claiming I'd kidnapped Owen. They even showed up at Owen's new school, demanding to pick him up. But here's the thing, I'd learned to document everything. Every phone call, every incident, every interaction. I had dates, times, witnesses, police report numbers. I was building a case, and Carol and Gary were helping me do it by being absolutely unhinged. Ryan, to his credit, tried to get them to stop. He called me one evening, sounding exhausted. Megan, please, you have to get them to back off. They're talking about hiring a private investigator to find out where you're working, where Owen goes to school. This is getting crazy. I'm not the one making it crazy, Ryan. Tell them to leave us alone. I've tried. They won't listen to me. Then cut them off. Tell them that if they don't stop harassing us, you'll never speak to them again. There was a long pause. I can't do that. Then I guess we don't have anything else to talk about. That's when I realized that Ryan was never going to choose Owen and me over his parents. He was never going to be the man I needed him to be, the father Owen deserved to have. But I was done waiting for him to figure it out. The real turning point came about 6 weeks after we'd moved to Portland. I was at work, going through some financial reports, when I got a call from Owen's school. Mrs. Henderson? This is Principal Harper. We've had an incident. My heart stopped. Is Owen okay? Owen's fine, but we had 2 adults show up claiming to be his grandparents. They said they were here to pick him up for a family emergency. When we asked for identification and tried to verify with you, they became very aggressive. We've called the police. I was out the door before he finished talking. When I got to the school, Carol and Gary were in the principal's office with 2 police officers. Owen was in the nurse's office, and he ran to me the moment he saw me. Mommy. Grandma and Grandpa were here, but they were being mean to the teachers. I knelt down and hugged him tight. It's okay, baby. You're safe. One of the officers came over to talk to me. Officer Davis, according to his badge. Are you Megan Henderson? Yes. These individuals claim to be your son's grandparents. They say there's been a custody dispute. There's been no custody dispute, I said. We're in the middle of divorce proceedings, but there's been no custody hearing. These people have no legal right to my son. Officer Davis looked at Carol and Gary, who were both red-faced and arguing with the principal. They don't have any documentation, he said. No court orders, no custody agreement, nothing. And they became verbally abusive when the school staff tried to verify their story. What happens now? Well, technically, they haven't committed a crime. But we're going to strongly advise them to leave the premises and not return. If they show up again, that would be trespassing. Carol overheard him. This is ridiculous. That's our grandson. We have rights. Actually, ma'am, you don't, Officer Davis said calmly. Grandparents don't have automatic visitation rights, especially when there's documented evidence of abuse. Abuse? Carol's voice went up about 3 octaves. We never abused anyone. I pulled out my phone and showed him the pictures I'd taken of Owen's bruises. This is from when she twisted his arm after he spilled a drink. And his grandfather spit in his face. Officer Davis looked at the photos, then at Carol and Gary. I think you folks need to leave. Now. They left, but not quietly. Carol was screaming about how I'd poisoned Owen against them, how I was destroying the family, how she'd make sure I paid for this. Gary was quieter, but the look he gave me as they walked away made my skin crawl. That evening, Jessica called me. I heard about what happened at the school, she said. This ends now. I'm filing for a restraining order first thing tomorrow morning. Can we do that? Attempted kidnapping, harassment, filing false reports, property damage. Megan, you've got enough for a restraining order and then some. And here's the best part, Ryan's going to have to choose. He can either support the restraining order against his parents, or he can be included in it. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. I had to take the day off work, but it was worth it to watch Jessica systematically destroy Carol and Gary's credibility. She'd organized everything: photos of Owen's bruises, police reports from all their harassment, documentation of the false CPS report, witness statements from Hannah, Owen's teacher, Principal Harper, even the CPS worker who'd investigated the false report. Carol and Gary had represented themselves, which was their first mistake. Carol spent most of her time crying and talking about how much she loved Owen, how she'd never hurt him, how I was keeping him away out of spite. Gary mostly just sat there looking angry, occasionally muttering under his breath about women today and liberal judges. Ryan showed up, but he sat in the back and didn't say a word. When the judge asked if he supported the restraining order, he just stared at the floor. "Your Honor," Jessica said, "the evidence clearly shows a pattern of escalating harassment and abuse. Mrs. Henderson is not asking to keep her son away from his grandparents out of spite, she's trying to protect him from people who have repeatedly demonstrated that they cannot control their behavior around children." The judge agreed. Carol and Gary were ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Owen, me, Hannah, Owen's school, and my workplace. They were prohibited from contacting us directly or indirectly, including through social media, phone calls, or third parties. The restraining order was good for 1 year, but could be extended if they violated it. They violated it 3 days later. I was grocery shopping with Owen when I spotted Gary's pickup truck in the parking lot. I'd memorized the license plate by then, another thing Jessica had taught me to do. I called the police from inside the store and waited. Officer Davis showed up about 10 minutes later. Apparently, he'd been dealing with Carol and Gary enough that he recognized the address. "Where's the truck?" he asked. I pointed through the window. Gary was sitting in the driver's seat, watching the store entrance. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," Officer Davis said. "I'm going to go have a conversation with Mr. Gary. You and your son are going to stay right here until I give you the all-clear." I watched through the window as Officer Davis approached the truck. Gary saw him coming and started his engine, but Officer Davis was faster. Within minutes, Gary was out of the truck with his hands behind his back. Violating a restraining order is a criminal offense. Gary spent the night in jail and had to post bail the next morning. But the best part? The bail hearing was public record, which meant it showed up in the local newspaper's court listings. Remember how I mentioned that Carol was proud of her job at the real estate office? Well, it turns out that real estate offices don't love being associated with employees whose family members are getting arrested for stalking and harassment. Carol was fired the following Monday. Gary's property management clients weren't too happy either. Word travels fast in small towns, and nobody wants to hire someone who's been arrested for violating a restraining order against a child. But I wasn't done yet. See, all of Gary's cash under the table work? The IRS is very interested in unreported income, especially when someone is simultaneously collecting Social Security benefits. I didn't report Gary to the IRS myself, that would have been petty. But I did make sure that all of his social media posts bragging about his various jobs were properly documented, along with the dates and approximate amounts he'd mentioned. And when the IRS eventually came calling, which they did, about 2 months later, well, Gary had some explaining to do. I found out about the audit from Ryan, who called me in a panic. "Megan, what did you do?" "The IRS is auditing my dad." "I didn't do anything, Ryan. But if your dad hasn't been reporting his income, that's between him and the federal government. You're destroying my family. I'm protecting mine. Your parents chose to escalate this situation at every turn. They chose to harass us, to violate a restraining order, to try to kidnap Owen from school. Every consequence they're facing is the direct result of their own actions." Ryan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to see Owen." "That's between you and your lawyer." "Come on, Megan. He's my son too." "Then you should have acted like his father when it mattered." The custody hearing was scheduled for late July, about 4 months after we'd left Washington. Ryan had finally hired a lawyer, a good one, actually, and was asking for joint custody and shared visitation. I wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. Despite everything, Ryan was Owen's father, and I didn't want to keep them apart forever. But I also wasn't going to agree to anything that put Owen at risk. Jessica had prepared for every possible argument Ryan's lawyer might make. We had documentation showing that Ryan had consistently failed to protect Owen from his parents' abuse. We had evidence of his refusal to support the restraining order. We had testimony from Owen's new therapist. Yes, I'd gotten him into therapy to help him process everything that had happened. But we also had something else. Something I hadn't expected. Owen had written a letter to the judge. His new teacher had helped him with it, and it was simple and heartbreaking. Dear Judge, I love my daddy, but I don't want to see Grandma and Grandpa anymore because they are mean to me and hurt me. My mommy keeps me safe. I want to stay with my mommy, but I want to talk to my daddy on the phone. Can you help us? Love, Owen. The judge read the letter in open court, and I saw Ryan's lawyer physically wince. In the end, we reached a settlement. Ryan got supervised visitation. He could see Owen, but only in a neutral location with a court-appointed supervisor present. He could call Owen twice a week at scheduled times. And most importantly, Carol and Gary were completely cut off. They would have no contact with Owen whatsoever until he turned 18 and could make his own decisions. Ryan also had to attend parenting classes and family therapy. If he completed the program successfully and could demonstrate that he was willing to put Owen's needs first, we could revisit the custody arrangement in a year. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. The day after the custody hearing, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered it. You think you've won, Carol's voice was shaky with rage. But you haven't. That boy is going to grow up hating you for keeping him away from his family. Carol, you're violating the restraining order by calling me. I don't care. You've destroyed everything. Gary lost his business, I lost my job, Ryan barely talks to us anymore. Are you happy now? I thought about it for a moment. Was I happy? Not exactly. I was sad that it had come to this. I was sad that Owen had to grow up knowing his grandparents had hurt him. I was sad that my marriage had ended. But I was also proud. I was proud that I'd stood up for my son when it mattered. I was proud that I'd chosen his safety over keeping the peace. I was proud that I'd shown him that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. I'm happy that my son is safe, I told Carol. I'm happy that he's learning that he doesn't have to accept being treated badly just because someone is family. And I'm happy that he has people in his life who will protect him, no matter what. I hung up and immediately called Officer Davis to report the violation. Carol was arrested the next day. Now, 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment in Portland, watching Owen play with his Legos. He's doing so much better, the nightmares have mostly stopped, and he's made friends at his new school. He still talks to Ryan twice a week, and those conversations are getting easier. Ryan's been doing the work, actually. He's in therapy, he's taking parenting classes, and most importantly, he's finally set boundaries with his parents. He told me last week that he hasn't spoken to them in 2 months, not since Carol's arrest for violating the restraining order. I finally get it, he said during one of our phone calls. I spent so long trying to keep everyone happy that I forgot who I was supposed to protect. It's too late for our marriage, some bridges can't be uncrossed. But maybe it's not too late for him to be the father Owen deserves. Hannah's been incredible through all of this. She let us stay with her for 3 months while I got on my feet, and she never once complained about the chaos we brought into her life. Owen adores her, and she's become the fun aunt every kid needs. My new job is going great. Turns out, getting out of a toxic situation can be pretty motivating. I've already been promoted once, and my boss has hinted that there might be a management position opening up next year. But the best part? Owen feels safe again. He laughs more, he sleeps through the night, and he's not constantly looking over his shoulder waiting for someone to hurt him. A few weeks ago, he asked me about that night at his grandparents' house. Mommy, why did Grandpa spit on me? I'd been dreading this conversation, but I tried to be honest without being cruel. Sometimes, people who are hurting inside try to make other people hurt too. It doesn't make it okay, but that's why it happened. Are Grandma and Grandpa hurting inside? I think so, buddy. But that's not your job to fix. Your job is just to be a kid. He thought about that for a minute, then went back to his Legos. I've learned a lot about myself these past 6 months. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. I learned that sometimes being a good mother means making hard choices that other people won't understand. I learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up for you when things get tough. Most importantly, I learned that my son deserves better than adults who make excuses for cruelty. Carol and Gary are still dealing with the consequences of their actions. Gary's IRS audit resulted in a hefty fine and back taxes, plus penalties. Carol's been unable to find another job in the small town where they live. Word gets around fast in places like that. They've had to sell their house and move into a small apartment. Ryan tells me they blame me for everything, which isn't surprising. People like that rarely take responsibility for their own choices. But here's what they don't understand. I didn't destroy their family. They did that themselves the moment they decided that hurting a child was acceptable. I just refuse to be complicit in it anymore. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how I handled things. They think maybe I was too harsh, too vindictive. Maybe I should have tried harder to work things out. To those people, I say this: my 7-year-old son had bruises on his arm and spit on his face from people who were supposed to love him. My husband told me to let it go. What exactly was I supposed to work out? I don't regret protecting my child. I don't regret demanding that the adults in his life treat him with basic human decency. I don't regret showing him that his safety and well-being matter more than keeping toxic people comfortable. Could I have handled some things differently? Maybe. But I'm not perfect. I'm just a mom who loves her kid and wasn't willing to sacrifice his well-being for the sake of family harmony. The restraining order is still in effect for another 6 months. After that, Carol and Gary will be free to try to contact us again, though they'll have to go through the courts if they want any kind of visitation with Owen. Honestly, I don't think they will. They've moved on to blaming me for all their problems, and people like that rarely have the self-awareness necessary for genuine change and apology. But if they do try to come back into our lives, they'll find that I'm not the same person who used to smile and nod and keep the peace. I'm not the woman who made excuses for people who hurt my child. I'm Owen's mom, and I'll move heaven and earth to keep him safe. That's a promise I made to myself the night I decided to leave, and it's a promise I intend to keep. Last week, Owen brought home a school assignment where he had to write about someone he admires. I was expecting him to write about a superhero or a sports star, but when I read it, my eyes filled with tears. I admire my mom because she keeps me safe and she moved us to a new place when people were being mean to me. She is brave and she makes the best grilled cheese sandwiches. She tells me that I never have to let anyone hurt me, even if they are family. My mom is my hero. I've got that essay pinned to our refrigerator, right next to his artwork and his perfect attendance certificate from his new school. Some days are still hard. Some days I wonder if I made the right choice, if there was some other way to handle everything that wouldn't have blown up our entire life. But then I look at my son, really look at him, and I see a kid who feels safe in his own skin again. I see a kid who knows that the adults in his life will protect him, not make excuses for people who hurt him. And I know I made the right choice. People always say that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water. But I've learned that the full quote is actually the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds you choose are stronger than the ones you're born into. Owen and I chose each other. Hannah chose to help us when we needed it most. Ryan is choosing to do the work to become a better father. Carol and Gary chose cruelty, chose pride, chose their own comfort over a child's well-being. We all have to live with the consequences of our choices. The difference is, I can sleep peacefully at night knowing that when my son needed me most, I showed up for him. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. Update: it's been almost a year now since we left Washington. Owen's doing amazing, straight A's, lots of friends, and he's joined the soccer team. Ryan and I are actually co-parenting pretty well now that he's done his therapy and learned to set boundaries with his parents. We'll never get back together, but we're building something better, a friendship focused on what's best for our son. Carol and Gary tried to contact me through a lawyer about 6 months ago, claiming they wanted to apologize and asking for supervised visitation with Owen. My lawyer told their lawyer exactly where they could shove that request. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. But the most important thing? Owen knows he's loved, he knows he's safe, and he knows that the people in his life will always choose his well-being over keeping the peace. That's worth more than all the family dinners in the world.